had been married for 28 years on the night I found out that I had been the only person in the marriage for the last 3 of them. That is the cleanest way I have found to say it, and I am a person who values a clean way to say things. So let me start there, and then tell you how I came to know it. My name is Joan. I am 53 years old, and I teach high school chemistry in Bozeman, Montana. I have stood at the same lab bench, more or less, for 26 years, teaching teenagers that the world is made of things you can measure, and that the measurement does not care how you feel about it. A reaction either happened or it did not. The mass balances or it does not. I have built my whole adult mind around that idea, around the quiet integrity of evidence, and I am telling you this at the very start because it is the thing that both blinded me and, in the end, saved me. I trusted the evidence of my marriage the way I trust a balanced equation, and I never once thought to check whether the equation I had been reading for 28 years was the same one my husband had been writing. His name is Glenn. We married young, at 25, and we built the ordinary good life that you build. A house, a daughter named Megan, who is grown now and away at school, 2 careers, a dog, a rhythm. Glenn sold commercial insurance and was good at it. Good with people in the easy backslapping way I never quite had. And for most of 28 years, I would have told you, without hesitation, that we were happy. Not on fire. Not the way you are at 25, but happy in the deep, worn, comfortable way of 2 people who have grown around each other like 2 trees planted too close, their roots long since tangled past telling apart. I believed that. I want you to understand that I genuinely, completely believed that, right up until 9:14 on a Tuesday night. I should tell you what those 28 years had actually looked like, because the word marriage is just a container, and you cannot feel the weight of what broke unless you know what was inside it. We had built a life with our hands. We had refinished the floors of that house together one brutal summer, both of us on our knees with the sander, laughing. We had sat up through Megan's fevers and her heartbreaks and her college applications. We had a shorthand, the way long couples do, a whole private language of half sentences and looks. Glenn knew how I took my coffee and which of my students were worrying me that week, and exactly how to make me laugh when I came home wrung out. I knew the sound of his key in the door. None of that had ever felt like a performance. That is the part I still turn over at night. It was not that the good years were fake. It is that the last 3 of them were, and I could not tell the difference, because the counterfeit was printed on the very same paper as the real thing. I remember the time because I am the kind of person who remembers the time. It was an ordinary evening. Glenn had gotten home late. He had been getting home late a lot that year. Work dinners, client things. The insurance world is all dinners, and I had never thought a thing about it. He had gone up to shower. His phone was on the kitchen counter, plugged into charge, face up beside the fruit bowl, the way it had sat 10,000 evenings. I was wiping down the counter, the most ordinary motion of my entire life, the cloth in my hand, and the phone screen lit up with a message. I was not snooping. I need you to know that, not because it would have been wrong to snoop, but because it matters to how completely this came out of nowhere. I was wiping a counter. The screen simply lit up, the way they do, with the sender's name and the first 2 lines of the message right there on the lock screen, bright in the dim kitchen, and my eyes went to it the way anyone's eyes go to a light in the dark. The sender, the phone told me, was Doug Pearson. I knew Doug Pearson. Doug Pearson was a man from Glenn's Rotary Club, a perfectly nice, perfectly dull man I had met at perhaps 4 functions over the years. And the message from Doug Pearson, glowing there on my kitchen counter at 9:14 on a Tuesday, said, "Tonight was perfect. I hate that you always have to go back to her. Soon, okay?" And then a small letter X, the kind you put at the end of a message to someone you're not supposed to be putting an X at the end of a message to. I stood there with the cloth in my hand for a very long time. Here is what I want to tell you about that moment, because it is the moment everything turned on, and it did not turn the way you might think. I did not scream. I did not drop the cloth. I did not run up the stairs and pound on the bathroom door. Something in me, the chemistry teacher, I think, the part of me that has spent 26 years refusing to react before I understand the data, went very, very cold and very, very still. Because my mind had already, in the space of about 2 seconds, done the work it is trained to do, and it had arrived at the central, impossible fact. Doug Pearson, the dull rotary man, does not send my husband messages that end in a lowercase x and talk about him going back to her. Which meant that the contact saved in my husband's phone as Doug Pearson was not Doug Pearson at all. It was a woman whose real name my husband had hidden, deliberately, behind the name of a man I would never think twice about, so that her messages could light up our kitchen counter 10,000 times, and I would never, ever look. The cover name was the thing that told me everything. An impulsive affair, a one-night mistake. That does not get a cover name. A cover name is infrastructure. A cover name is a man who sat down, at some point, and thought carefully about how to keep a second life running smoothly alongside the first, right under his wife's nose, for a long, long time. In that one glowing message, I was not looking at a slip. I was looking at a system. I put the cloth down, I picked up my own phone, and I did the thing I do. The thing 26 years of laboratory work had trained into my hands. I started gathering evidence. I did not confront him that night. I have thought about why, and the truth is not flattering and not noble. I did not confront him because I did not yet have enough data, and some deep cold part of me refused to walk into the most important conversation of my life, holding a hypothesis instead of a proof. That first night was the strangest of my life. Glenn came down from his shower in his old gray t-shirt, smelling of our soap, and he kissed the top of my head the way he had 10,000 times, and he asked what was for dinner, and I told him, in a perfectly level voice, that I had thought we would just do leftovers, and I watched myself hand him a plate. I do not know where that calm came from. I think some animal part of me understood that I was now living in enemy territory, and that my only advantage was that the enemy did not yet know I had crossed the border, so I kept the border secret. I lay beside him that night, in the bed we had shared for 28 years, listening to him sleep the easy sleep of a man who believed he had gotten away with it for another day. And I stared at the ceiling, and I began, very quietly, in the dark, to make my list of what I would need to know. Over the next 9 days, I built my proof. I am not proud of the methods, and I am not ashamed of them either. A woman who has just discovered her marriage is a forgery is entitled to read the document. I learned that Doug Pearson in his phone was a woman named Sharon, a regional manager he had met at a conference, a woman with a husband of her own 3 states away. That was the her too in another message, the him she also had to go back to. I learned, from the dates and the dinners, and the mileage on his car, and the credit card statements I had access to, and had simply never had a reason to read closely, that it had been going on for 3 years. 3 years. I went back through 3 years of my own life, 3 years of evenings I had thought I understood, 3 anniversaries, a trip to see Megan at school, where he had taken 2 extra days for work, and I reread every one of them with the new key in my hand, and every single one of them decoded into something other than what I had been told. It is a particular kind of vertigo, that, to have 3 years of your own memory quietly rewrite themselves in front of you, to learn that you were not where you thought you were, that the equation you were so sure was balanced, had a whole hidden term in it the entire time. One memory in particular I have not been able to put back down. 18 months before, I had thrown Glenn a 50th birthday party, a real one, months of planning, all his friends, a slideshow of his life, a cake shaped like a fishing boat because he had always wanted a boat. He had cried at that party. He had stood up in front of everyone and thanked me, his voice breaking, and said he did not deserve a wife like me, and the whole room had gone soft, and I had glowed for a week. And now, with the new key in my hand, I understood that he had been 3 months into Sharon at that party, that he had stood there with real tears in his eyes, thanking me for a love he was, at that very moment, betraying, and that I do not deserve a wife like me had not been humility at all. It had been the closest that man ever came, in 3 years, to telling me the truth. I simply could not hear it because I did not yet have the key. And I want to be honest about the hardest part of those 9 days, because the channel I am telling this on is one where we try to tell the truth, even the unflattering parts. The hardest part was not the rage, though there was rage. The hardest part was the long, cold, 3 in the morning question of how much of it was mine. Because a marriage does not usually grow a 3-year hidden term out of nothing, and I am not a woman who lies to herself, and so I made myself look. Had we grown apart? We had. Had I let the deep, comfortable, worn thing become a distant thing, two trees so used to each other that we had stopped actually looking at one another years ago? Probably. Had I been so certain of the evidence that I stopped collecting it, stopped ending the marriage, assumed the equation would stay balanced forever without my touching it? Yes. I made myself sit with all of that, honestly, in the dark. And then I made myself learn the other thing, the thing it took me those 9 days to understand, and it is the thing I most want to hand to you. None of that gave him the right. A neglected marriage is a problem two people are supposed to solve in the daylight, together, with words. It is a reason to have a hard conversation, or to go to counseling, or even, if it has truly died, to end it honestly and walk away clean. It is not a reason to build a 3-year secret system with a cover name in your phone. My failures in that marriage, whatever they were the failures of a partner who had stopped paying attention. His were the failures of a man who had decided to lie to my face every single day for 3 years and let me keep loving a person who no longer existed. Those are not the same kind of failure, and I spent 9 cold nights making very sure I would not let anyone, least of all him, ever talk me into pretending that they were. On the 10th day, I confronted him. I chose the time, a Saturday morning, daylight, both of us sober and rested, because I refused to have this conversation as a scene and was determined to have it as a reckoning. I put the evidence on the kitchen table, the same table the phone had lit up beside, organized, dated, undeniable. And I watched my husband of 28 years go through every single stage I had known, in my cold scientist's heart, that he would go through. First, he tried denial, and the evidence on the table closed that door in under a minute. Then he tried minimizing. It didn't mean anything. It was just physical. It was a stupid mistake. 3 years, I said, is not a mistake. A mistake is a thing you do once and are sick about. What you built was a project. Then, and this is the one I had been waiting for, the one that told me everything I needed to know about whether this marriage could be saved. He tried to give it to me. He started talking about how distant I had been, how cold, how I was always grading papers, how a man has needs, and I had stopped. And there it was. Not I am so sorry, not I destroyed something precious, not what can I do. There it was. This is, at least partly, your fault. And I understood, watching his mouth move, that a man who responds to being caught in a 3-year betrayal by itemizing his wife's shortcomings is not a man in the middle of remorse. He is a man in the middle of a negotiation. He was not trying to repair anything. He was trying to lower the price. I did not yell at him. I have thought about whether I should have, whether some part of 28 years deserved a scene, and I have decided no. I simply waited until he had run all the way down. And then I told him, calmly, that I had heard everything he had to say, and that none of it changed the single fact on the table, which was that he had looked me in the eye every day for 3 years and chosen the lie. And then I told him that I had already seen a lawyer. I had, on day 7, and that I would be staying at my sister's, and that he could keep the house until it sold because I did not want it anyway. I did not want to live one more night inside a building where I had been a tenant in my own marriage and not known it. The bag was already packed. It had been packed since day 8. I am, as I have said, a person who likes to have her proof in order before she acts. I have been asked, since, whether I gave him a chance, whether 28 years did not earn him a shot at counseling, at rebuilding, at proving he could change. And I understand the question. And for some marriages, I think the answer is yes, and I do not judge the women who stay and do the brutal work of rebuilding, because that is its own kind of courage. But here is what I knew, sitting at that table. I knew that he had not come to me in 3 years, even once. Not when it started, not when it deepened, not when it became a system with a cover name. A person who is capable of being reached does not build 3 years of infrastructure to avoid being reached. He had made his choice about our marriage long before that phone lit up. He had just arranged things so that he got to keep the comfortable half of it while living the other half in secret. The only thing the notification changed was that now I knew. And I was not willing to spend whatever years I have left negotiating my own worth down to a price a liar was comfortable paying. I moved out that week. The divorce was not pretty. They rarely are. But it was clean in the way that matters. I did not beg. I did not bargain. I did not spend a single hour trying to make a man who had built a 3-year lie suddenly become a man who would not. I grieved. God knows I grieved. Not for the marriage as it actually was, which had apparently ended 3 years before I found out, but for the marriage I had believed I was in, which was, I have had to accept, the only place that one had ever really existed, in my belief. I am all right now. Better than all right, on the days I am honest about it. I have my own small place across town, with too many books and a chemistry teacher's tidy kitchen, and a counter that, when a light comes on in the dark, holds nothing on it I am afraid to read. Megan and I are closer than we have ever been, and I have gotten back a thing I did not even know I had handed over somewhere in those 28 years, which is the simple, settled, daily knowledge of what I am worth. A number I had quietly let my marriage define for me, and that I have taken back into my own keeping, where it should have been all along. People expected me to be more shattered than I am, and for a while their expectation made me wonder if something was wrong with me. But I have come to understand the calm, and I will tell you what it is, in case you ever need it. It is not that it did not hurt. It is that the truth, even a brutal truth, is solid ground, and I had spent 3 years standing on something that turned out to be air, without ever knowing it. There is a particular relief underneath the grief in finally being told the real shape of things, in trading a comfortable lie for an uncomfortable fact you can actually stand on. I'm a scientist. I would always rather know. I have, in every part of my life, rather known the true thing than believed a pleasant false one, and it turns out that holds even when the true thing takes your whole marriage down with it. The ground is hard now, but it is ground. I'm not falling anymore. If you have ever found out, in one terrible instant, that the life you thought you were living was not the one you were actually in, if a screen has ever lit up in the dark and shown you the truth, then this story is for you. One word in the comments, if it found you. Worth. Just that. It is for everyone who has had to learn their own value the hard way, in the wreckage of someone else's lie, and who is still deciding, right now, whether they are going to keep paying for a comfortable untruth or finally walk out into the cold, clean air of what is real. Subscribe for new stories, real patterns, full narratives, the long game. 2 small pieces of wisdom from this one, before I go. The first, when you find out you have been betrayed, you are going to be handed, almost immediately, the temptation to make it partly your own fault, and the person who betrayed you will hand it to you first and fastest, because it lowers their price. Be very careful with that. Look honestly at your part in whatever distance grew. Yes, honesty is not optional, and self-deception helps no one. But never let your real, ordinary failures, as a partner, get quietly traded as if they were equal to a deliberate, sustained lie. A marriage that has gone distant is a shared problem to be solved in daylight. A secret built to last is one person's choice, made alone, again and again. Do not let anyone convince you those 2 things balance. They do not. The equation does not balance, and you are allowed to say so out loud. The second, somewhere in a long marriage, it is terribly easy to let the other person become the keeper of your worth, to let their attention, or their approval, or simply their presence, become the quiet measure of what you are. I did that without ever noticing, and the cruelest gift of that lit up screen was finding out my worth had been outsourced to a man who had been secretly marking it down for 3 years. Take it back. Whatever you are worth it, whether or not the person beside you has noticed lately, and if you have handed the measuring of it to someone else, go and get it back now, while it is still a choice and not yet a wreckage you are standing in. Never set yourself on fire to keep a liar warm. You were always worth more than the version of you that stayed. I'll see you next time.